Hello and welcome to the free lunch, lunchtime chats with interesting people. And today I'm very excited to welcome my cousin, Andrew Ross.
Hello,
Hi,
hello,
Andrew.
hello.
Good to see you. I'd like to say that Andrew and I see a lot of each other. We don't see nearly enough of each other, but every now and again we do have a little cousinly reunion. And I thought that it would be great to chat to Andrew today because he actually spent nearly 20 years in the Royal Marines, reaching the exalted rank of Lieutenant Colonel. And he then came out of the army and went um, into Civvy Street, which is also done almost another 20 years of that in various different roles that he'll probably tell us about. But I'm very interested, Andrew, in hearing about your career and your life, particularly in, shall we say, the frame of leadership, which is kind of my subject. And I'd love to hear about your experience of leadership in the military in terms of that kind of framework where you're backed up by the system. So you tell somebody to do something, they kind of have to do it. But I don't think that necessarily solves everything, right? Well, we'll let you talk about that. And then of course when you come out of that and you're into an environment of what we most of us are used to, which is when we need to become good leaders and hope that we will create followers, which is a little bit different perhaps than having a team of soldiers. I don't know, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you and please tell us about you.
Well, Edward, what a complete pleasure, and thank you very much indeed for including me in your journey. I think leadership is a great subject to kick around, and I think everybody in almost every walk of life has experienced good and bad leaders, and I'm no exception, probably because I'm may have been a good leader. I probably was also a pretty terrible one at various points as well. But I've certainly seen both in all walks of life, and um, you know, I think I can make a contribution in this regard because of this military civilian
Mhm.
kind of balance, because there are subtleties involved, and they are different in many ways, but actually they're probably more similar than you imagine, Edward.
Right.
And I have to say, I'd like to pick up on something you said in your
Mhm.
introduction, where you, you know when you are in the military context and you are giving orders, that there is an element of yes, it does have to be done, but there is a there's an element that a lot of people don't quite grasp in that regard. And the thing about the military that the civilian sector doesn't have is a third element, which I describe it as in normal, if you like, corporate context. You'll have management and you'll have leadership, and they're not quite the same as I think most tomes will touch on.
Mhm.
In the military, there's a third thing called command,
Uh-huh.
and command is a mandate to make things happen with that backing that you describe.
Yeah.
It's the no, no, I've heard what you've had to say. I just want you now to go and do it. So go and do it because I've got this, you haven't, therefore you do it. A- And that's pretty much a necessity in the profession of arms for all the obvious reasons. You do have to do things that may seem either crazy or mad or unpleasant or dangerous or scary, but the job needs to get done. So ultimately, that's why you're given that mandate.
Yeah.
But that's different to good leadership. Good leadership is where everybody knows you've got that mandate. Everybody knows you're the officer, everybody knows you're the boss, whatever it happens to be, but you bring people along with you on your journey through persuasion, coercion, bribery, whatever it is, to get people to achieve that mission,
Yeah.
ideally without having to rely on the mandate, the look, we disagree, but now I'm just telling you to do it, because I think at that point you've sort of lost your audience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Are you aware of the the model of the three types of problem: the critical problems, the tame problems, and the wicked problems.
Yeah, no.
I think you'll like it, and it's incredibly relevant to what you just said, and it is in my book for those listening who might be tempted to buy it. So critical problems are immediate and urgent and need immediate attention, and they need a commander. So
Mm,
if the place is on fire, somebody appears wearing a yellow helmet and says run, and you run. You don't say, can we discuss this fire and how long have you been a fireman, right? You just get on with it. And then tame problems are management issues. So that's all about improving processes. So they can be extremely complicated processes like flying a fighter jet or driving a tank. But in the end, they are things you can practice and learn and repeat, right?
mm,
And then you've got wicked problems. For that, you need managers, right? And then you've got wicked problems, and they are fundamentally problems that don't have a solution. And that's where you need the leadership.
mm.
Because what you're actually looking for there is an emotional response, right?
Yeah.
So with the management, you're looking for a rational response. And with the critical problems, you're often looking for a physical response, like run. But there can be crises in work as well when it's not quite a physical response, but everybody speeds up and stops doing whatever they're doing, right? And I think that little model is quite useful because really almost every problem we face fits into one of those three at some area. And to your point, I think that there's probably a misunderstanding that in the military situation it's all about command,
Hmm.
whereas a tremendous amount of your work must be also about managing in order
Absolutely.
to be kind of repeating things and doing them better and better. And then there must be that moment, that emotional moment, where it's like, well, tomorrow we're going into battle, and that's where you need people to follow you
Mm.
and
Abs-
believe that you're the best person to lead them into that battle.
yeah, no, no, completely. And I think to the thing that makes the good leader, and if we just wrap it all up and put a label around it and call it a leader rather than a manager, because I think
Yeah.
we're talking about leadership here, is that you do need to, not only do you need the skill set to be able to deploy those different techniques to manage the different situations. There's another axis. You also need to be able to do it at different times.
Right.
And this was borne out to me really effectively. I remember when I was in Shell on a leadership program, and I went and spoke to a. They said, "Oh, as part of this course, you've got to go and speak to a senior person." So I thought, well, it'd be a bit cheesy to go to the chief executive, but I went to the guy who was running the whole of the upstream at the time, which is an enormous chunk of the business, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah.
And he was an extremely bright person and a very competent leader, and he gave me an absolute pearl of wisdom,
Hmm.
which um, since that day I interviewed him, I've tried very hard to understand where I am on the scale, and I'll describe it in a second. But I also recognise that without knowing about it, I was doing it previously in my military incarnation. And the
Hmm.
model is it relates to command, leadership, and management, but it's about how you apply these tools, these levers. And it starts at the top with tell, it goes to sell, it goes to discuss, it goes to consult, and it goes to ask, which ranges from at the tail end of the scale, look, just do it. This
Yeah.
is how I want it done. I want everything painted orange. Now go do it. And that's more of the, the sharp end, as you describe your three buckets. Selling is where you're really trying to build a consensus and bring everybody along with you, moving through to discuss, to sort of brainstorm and get that diversity of optionality, through to consult, where you haven't got any really formed ideas in your mind, through to asking, which is you've got no ideas in your mind and you've no idea how to solve the problem. And that goes talks to your, exposing your weaknesses and the fact that leaders don't know all the answers. And if you look at for example, the special forces model of how they get things done, it's really consultative because they are groups, as most military organizations are. You've got groups of specialists who the logisticians know more about logistics than the commander who is busy pushing sweeping arrows across the map.
Right.
The aviation expert knows more about helicopter range and capacity than you do. So why wouldn't you consult them to do that?
Hmm.
And so it's about identifying who the experts are, putting them together, coming up with a solution, rather than steamrolling across a diverse team and losing the diversity.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. So I'm a very big fan of adaptive leadership, which is essentially, to put it in simple terms, the idea that the power is not in the leader, but the power is in the organization.
Hmm.
And the leader has a very specific role, which is to be the leader. And that does not mean that the leader is supposed to do everybody else's job. In fact, quite the opposite.
Mm.
When one of the things I talk about in my book is this idea of pushing work up. So if you think about it, if you constantly kind of ask the boss, what shall we do? And if the boss constantly says, yes, 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 better leave it with me, I'm probably the best person to decide. Well, guess what? They'll go to the pub, right? Well, the boss decides.
Mm.
Whereas if you, as you said, no, I want to hear what you think. You do it. You tell me the right approach. Um, and I think that is extremely interesting. And I did read somewhere that it was about the US military, but that there was a realization over the last, let's say, 30, 40 years that troops need to think as opposed
Mm.
to just kind of like run into that hail of bullets, will you, old chap?
Yep.
It's kind of like, no, no, we need to discuss this first. We all need to have agreed, and we need to know why we're doing something, which I expect in years gone by wasn't a big feature of the military, but I bet has
Wow.
now become it.
Let
Um,
me challenge you there. Let me challenge you there in the nicest possible way, because this is a really, it's a great opportunity for me to blur a couple of myths out of the
yeah,
water.
I love that.
So going back to how we get things done in the battlefield is, we get given a task and we think about how we're going to deal with it, and we write what are called orders, which is essentially a business plan of how you're going to go and do something.
Hmm.
Um, and it follows a set sequence, no matter who you're with, whether you're with the Danish cavalry or with a Scottish regiment. That the sequence of orders is the same. And the one thing that sits quite near the top is the mission statement.
Mm.
And the mission statement has three elements in it. And by the way, it's repeated twice so that if everybody forgets everything else you say about the moon state and where the barbed wire needs to go, at least they remember the mission because it was said twice. So the thing about the mission statement is it's always got three elements in it. It tells you what the phase of war is: attack, withdraw, defend, whatever it happens to be, so that people kind of put the right cassette in their head. They know roughly what they're doing. And then there's the actual task: capture hill 1, 2, 3 by midnight. And then there is a thing called the unifying purpose. And that is the why, Edward. It basically tells us why we're capturing hill 1, 2, 3. And so it would say something like capture hill 1, 2, 3 in order to deny it to a potential enemy advance in the south, and thereby protecting our southern flank. And why is that important? Well, that's really important because not only does it give people that kind of motivation, they understand that it's for a sensible reason, not just, foolhardy leaders saying, go and attack over the top. Um, but more importantly than that, it means that if, for example, there's another opportunity, or capturing hill 1, 2, 3 doesn't appear to make any difference to the battlefield, but actually the bridge just to the north of it is the real thing that needs to be dealt with. This goes back to we need thinking people, not just cannon fodder.
Mm.
Then I'm going to extend my mandate. I'm going to capture hill 1, 2, 3, or even bypass it, but I'm going to go and get that bridge, because I know by doing that I'm going to deny the enemy the ability to do that counterstrike. So I'm achieving the mission by understanding that unifying purpose, and the why people do it is almost more important, that it eclipses every other aspect of the orders. process. So it's a
That
really
is so
important
interesting, and listen to the language as well that we're so used to now in business, right? Mission, purpose, all these kind of things,
factor.
and there they are being used for decades in the military. I think that's very interesting. I must admit that I've noticed something. I mean, I'm interested in history, so I tend to read quite a lot of history, and it always strikes me that in the way that the military was set up over many hundreds of years, there were some sort of basic truths of leadership and how to get things done and arrange things were sort of present, albeit maybe in slightly different environment and context.
Mm,
For example, I've always been interested in the fact that in a ship setting off for 2 years around the world with no communication whatsoever, that the captain would have a very large cabin and the officers would have a fairly small space to live in. And if the captain was going to go for dinner with the officers, he has to be invited. So
absolutely.
essentially, you live in a very nice cabin, but you're on your own,
Mm.
and that's because if you become over familiar with your team, I'm also very into what is the right kind of relationship to have with your team as a leader.
And again, what you've captured beautifully there is a concept that is familiar to pretty much anybody in the military, and it's called the loneliness of command.
Right.
And it is a condition which you just described beautifully. You can be the captain of an aircraft carrier, but like you say, you have to be invited to the wardroom by the officers. And it is indeed to preserve a number of things, including that's, if you like, healthy
Yeah.
distance between the leader and the led. But it is also it is a thing, and it can be pretty depressing actually. I mean, I remember vividly being um, on a deployment to Turkey and Ukraine, actually, of all places, but before it slightly got borrowed, and it was a great deployment because we were sort of on our own in a ship with all sorts of people. In fact, it was a great time. I had more of the commando's assets than the commanding officer at the time because I was off on a task, which was great. So I had my own sort of little empire, but I was on my own, and so I had my own cabin. I had the freedom of the privilege of a bit of space. But actually, when you went into various ports, I was sort of thinking, oh golly, I wonder if they're going to invite me out to go for a couple of beers. And actually, it was a huge relief when they did, and they said, "Come on, sir, come and have a couple of drinks," because if they hadn't, that would have been a real indicator
Mm.
that my leadership style had somehow not worked with them, and that they didn't like me. It's not about populism, but it was, like, respect, want to be with, want to, spend
Yeah,
time with.
it would have been a
They wouldn't have wanted it.
it would have been a message. I mean, it's
Mm,
I'm very keen on the idea that leaders need to work on the self awareness, and
mm,
as I think you know in my book, I call that mepathy,
mm,
and a bit of a sort of a take an evolution of empathy, and I think that in the business world they have 360 reviews, which I expect they have those in the military too. But I think that's a pretty clear 360 review if you don't get invited out for a drink by your team.
indeed, indeed, and there are worse ones. I mean, the concept of fragging in the Vietnam War with the Americans, who, if the guys didn't like their officer or they thought they were going to get them killed, well, a fragmentation grenade was placed where it shouldn't have been. So,
Is that where
you
word fragging comes from? I didn't know that. I've
indeed,
heard the
yeah,
word. Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nasty.
You
Glad
really know you're a
we
bad
bring
leader
that one into your typical corporate world, shall we?
Yes, fortunately, it's less common these days. But it is, but nonetheless, metaphorically, of course, there are equivalents, and if you haven't got it right as a leader, and by extension a manager, um, if you haven't been careful with your people, then there will be, you will know about it. There will be the slightly superficial, but nonetheless, in certain cases, very effective 360s, which can be hugely powerful. I'm a great advocate of that form of reporting, but if you've got a low EQ, or very thick skin, or a lack of conscience, or all three, then you can either miss or intentionally ignore or subconsciously disregard signals that are sent to you from the people that you are allegedly leading.
Yeah.
Uh,
But it's
and
also about balance because they do want leading as well.
mm,
They want a person who's ready to take the decision when they need to,
yeah.
and everybody looks at you, and you're kind of like looking lost. That's not what they're looking for, which is exactly the same in business.
Mm. No, indeed, and we there are many sort of tomes on leadership that describe followership.
Right.
It's a thing. You put your finger on it there, Edward. That those who are led want to be led.
Yeah.
They a marine or a corporal will look to his officer and will expect them to lead them.
Yeah.
And when there's a sort of an exercise or an operation where people can see how other organizations, other troops or companies are being led, they can see the difference,
Yeah.
and the guys have a view as to which one they like. Believe me,
Yeah.
and they will communicate that. And indeed, I was flattered indeed to be on an operation in West Africa a number of years ago, and there were a number of individuals, both officers and senior non-commissioned officers, who came to me for advice and coaching and thoughts and careers advice and what have you, rather than their own chain of command, which of course is a statement actually.
Yeah.
So there's an example of where bad leadership has an impact on
And
other parts of the organisation.
can be quite tricky for you as well. That can definitely happen in businesses and corporations. I think where somebody is a good leader and a good manager recognizes that, and then people will be seen to go to them, and then their actual leaders and manager will sort of become jealous and
For
disappointed
sure.
and create trouble. There's this um, German philosopher called Martin Buber, and he wrote in like 1930s, and I like something that I'm interested in something he wrote about, which he called I it and I you. So I it is kind of when you have a very transactional relationship with somebody else. So for example, the typical example is buying the train ticket. You just say one train ticket and the person hands you the train ticket and you go off and get on the train. So that could have been a machine really. But the IU relationship would be, oh, morning, Fred. How are the children? Yeah, my usual ticket to Paddington. Thank you very much. Hope you have a lovely day. See you tomorrow. Right.
Mm,
So what's interesting about that is that that's a human interaction, but you actually aren't going to go to his house. You actually aren't ever going to meet his wife. You know the name of his children, which he appreciates, but you're actually never going to play with them, and you're never going to sit with him in your front room at 4 o'clock in the morning drinking whiskey and talking about life, which is an important distinction. And I think that this is the point of why I'm saying this is that in the corporate world, perhaps in the military, you want to be close to your people, you want to know their names, you want to show interest in them, but you don't want to be sitting there at 4 o'clock in the morning with a whiskey,
mm, mm.
because one day you might have to say in the more in the sort of corporate world, you might have to say, I'm afraid you've got to go, old chap. No longer space for you in this team, which would be very tough if you're now like real friends with someone.
Yeah.
And
No, I
I imagine the military situation could be even worse.
no. Well, and I've seen that I've seen that picture in both, Edward. You describe it well. I like it. The and I've seen where it goes wrong. I've seen where it goes wrong, and there have been there was an awkward situation where we had a young officer who had passed out of training, and in the Royal Marines, for a period of time, when you're a young officer, once you've got your green beret and you've been commissioned and you're out in the world, you're still on probation for a period of time, and there was an awkward scenario where a young officer was struggling to find that distance
Mhm.
between that we described earlier, and one of the things that he didn't really understand was this distance, and it's not about being snotty or aloof or arrogant. It's about making sure that when the corporal says, come on, sir, have another beer. You go, look, I'm really sorry, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock for the run, and off you go. Rather than trying to be one of them, like you say, the people who are led want you to be a leader. They want you to be different,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, this got to a point where the guys would then take advantage of it. You
Right.
know, they say familiarity breeds contempt. Well, my goodness, it's quite correct, and you see it in the corporate sector as well,
Absolutely.
where people believe they've got a soft touch for a boss, they will not deliver. To the appropriate standard necessarily, because if they have been out and been chummy and they know their wives and children's names, then they'll think they've got a sort of a reason to call that favour in, if they've been a poor deliverer.
Well, it's all
So
about balance, isn't it? Because it's a very good thing when a boss or a leader does know about the people on their team, takes an interest in their lives, and hopefully they make it take a little bit of interest in their leaders' lives as well. I mean, that's
mm,
nothing wrong with that. The
mm,
difference is when it kind of crosses over into something else that can be taken advantage of,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then can, I think, be seen quite quickly as weakness, which is
yeah.
the thing that of course people take
It's
advantage of.
it is, but it's a really delicate thing. But knowing your bosses, a little bit of a personal life, or seeing them when they have a difficult time, how they deal with it. Uh, Actually, if they're good people, and if they're respected leaders and liked leaders, uh, then um, then it's accommodated.
Mm.
Whereas if they're not, it could be exploited,
Right, absolutely.
and indeed it is frequently.
And I think looping back to sort of so many of these things are interconnected, aren't they? That I'm a very big believer that we don't have to be good at everything to be a good leader. In fact, it isn't a good thing because typically we're not good at everything.
Mm.
Hopefully, we're good at some things. So somebody in your team will be good at other things. So let's use that. Let's use that diversity and make that a strength of the team. And I worked for at least one person I can think of who was exhausting because they had to be right and they had to know everything about everything and they had to be kind of the last word on every single thing the team was talking about. And
Mm.
so the tendency then is for the team to think, can't be bothered to say my part because
Yeah,
it's probably wrong,
yeah, yeah,
even though actually I think I might know a bit more about this than this person.
yeah. No, I, I think I'm sure everybody watching this, well, it will absolutely resonate with them, and it's also, it says a really deep and visceral message to the subordinate, or the junior in the relationship. It basically says, I don't rate you. I don't rate you enough to. I don't respect you enough or rate you enough because I'm much more important than you, and I'm just not going to listen to you. And I think it's, that's it. Just it's such a toxic message to send. Um, uh, but if you can communicate effectively to the extent whereby, um, you've listened to the individual, and you've expounded, why you feel the way you feel about an issue, and why you think your view might differ because
Yeah.
you perhaps might have particular experience in the area, then I think you can bring people with you, even if you're at a 180-degree disagreement. You can bring people along with you, but you're right. There have been,
Agree. I mean,
there's
this
nothing
balance
worse than an
between
autocrat.
authority, power, respect, they're all very kind of intermingled and difficult to grab onto.
Deeply.
Anyone who's read my book will know I talk about the cruise ship as a sort of leadership model and saying that you've got the captain of the cruise ship who has got a very clear set of things that they are responsible for. And that, if the ship hits a rock, even if the captain is off the ship in a completely different place, it's still their responsibility if the ship.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, on the ship, they do not want to be interfering with all the little bits and pieces that are going on. They do not want to be down in the kitchen, sticking their noses into how we're making the Spanish omelette in the morning. On the
Absolutely.
other hand, the person who makes the Spanish omelette looks at that guy for that to the captain for where are we going next? Are we going to the Mediterranean? Are we going to the Antarctic? And weirdly, back to another thing we were discussing earlier, it makes a big difference to the crew to know where they're going next. That's the why,
And
right?
why they're making the omelette. Yeah.
And why, why it's important. And this is why all these things are so interesting. So, okay, what about 19 years in the military, you rose up, you had all these experiences, and that's very interesting indeed. And then you took that terrifying leap of deciding to leave the Corps and go into Civvy Street. How did it feel when you first got into Civvy Street? And did you immediately feel that difference in terms of not having this kind of structure behind you, or not?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think I defy anybody who has done the journey that I've taken to not be completely paralyzed by fear in that transition. There are times where you really do think, oh my goodness, what am I about to do? What am I doing? What have I just done? So it's but I think if you've done what we call the estimate, if you've done your decision making process effectively, then you hang on to that and it carries you through. Um, and I would say within the first 30 minutes of being outside the Royal Marines and in Shell, I started to identify differences, of
Mm,
course.
mm,
My first experience was to be working in a part of the business that was based in Africa, in Nigeria, which isn't necessarily the most straightforward operating environment. It's extremely complex, and it's got lovely aspects and aspects that are less lovely. So in a way, it was quite a good transition job because it was slightly wild and woolly and great fun and hugely there were never 2 days, not least of it 2 hours that were the same. So from that perspective, there was a frisson of excitement about the job, which was not a million miles from some of the jobs I'd done in the military. So that was great fun, mostly. But I think it was when I then moved from there into a corporate role based out of Europe that I then felt I was in a more, how shall I say, conventional
right.
transition role. And that's where I really, it was less what I call operational, day to day problem solving, which was the Nigeria picture. And it was more sort of corporate management, deliberate change programs, understanding how to fit into the makeup of a big corporate animal like Royal Dutch Shell. And I think for me that was a much that was actually almost a bigger transition than going from the Royal Marines to Shell in Nigeria. And so, from there that was a real. I went in and I spent a lot of my effort was spent observing
Hmm.
and learning and listening, because I think, as in any of these circumstances, if you go in all guns firing, you're probably going to end up making a chump of yourself. And I wanted to avoid that if possible.
No question, listening is an extremely good skill.
Hugely. And I think, to connecting the last bit of the conversation with this bit was, and in the military, or in the corporate sector, one of the key elements, whilst you were talking, I was thinking again and again and again, this word keeps cropping up to the top of the pile, is trust.
Hmm.
Now, whether you're trying to solve a problem in the Niger Delta, or whether you are making a Spanish omelette on an aircraft carrier going, or a cruise ship going down to Antarctica, people need to be trusted. The leader needs to be trusted that they're
Right.
going to get it right. They need to be trusted by their bosses as well as the people beneath them, or their co-workers, their peer group. It's not strictly limited to the hierarchy, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also, individuals, if they feel trusted, they feel empowered.
Yep.
And it's the delegation, of the sort of effusing of trust is an incredibly powerful leadership tool, in my opinion.
I agree.
So much so that if people don't feel trusted because they are being led by an autocrat, then they will generally not perform well and probably behave badly.
Yes, an authentic trusting, right?
Mm,
And it's interesting, isn't it, how you have all these processes, whether it's in a military situation or in a in a corporate one, and yet the processes aren't enough on their own, right? It's like you've got to. There's this sort of thing that goes in between it all, which, as you say, is the trust, is the emotional response. I mean, just something that popped into my head. I had a good mate in the army, and he was in one of the cavalry regiments, and I remember that he was the officer in charge of company regimental silver, and he was also the officer in charge of I think something like sporting events or something. And he had these two jobs. And so when he wanted to take the silver out of the safe where it was kept in order to give it away on the annual prizes, he had to send himself a memo. and, and this is always something that we were all having a good laugh about, the military and how you send yourself memos. But then actually, when you go into companies, you realize there's plenty of that kind of stuff goes on. And
mm,
what is definitely true is that that isn't enough to make everything work well.
no.
You can have as much kind of process as you like. In the end, there's something else that flows in between it all that actually does make it really work.
It is, as a sort of a leadership model, as a function, it is absolutely much more than the sort of the transactional. And I don't know what that thing that moves through it all is, but it's sure as hell helped by the trust, the giving and the receiving of trust. And again, to go corporate, we all know about RACI models, or
Hmm.
RASCI, or ASCII, SCI, because accountability trumps the law,
Ah,
of
okay.
course, as we know. And again, for me, the best leaders I've ever worked for have been those, and I've tried to do it to varying degrees of success through my life, in both in and out of uniform. But the best leaders for me have been those who have been very good at retaining accountability, which they have to, of course, but very good at giving responsibility.
Right.
And that gives you space and opportunity to develop and get it wrong, but doing it in a safe environment because you're covered by your boss who's retained that accountability.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's another super powerful bit of glue for that
I mean,
model that you
I
describe.
think great leaders ask good questions, and
Mm,
they are constantly pushing that responsibility back. What would you do, and how would you do it? And then when it's okay, we'll go and do it then. And then
yeah,
if it goes wrong, to back you up. Right?
absolutely,
And I think
absolutely.
that's something that you know. It's all sounds so simple, but the reality is that we've all seen it working so many different ways across the spectrum of really working to
Mm,
not working at all. What about, let's just talk for the last few minutes, let's talk about change. So I'm
mm,
interested in, if you think about the military, you've got a very structured organization, which, as you say, I'm sure there's like a memo on everything, how to do it, right? So one thing about the military is you don't have to invent that, right? If you're the officer in charge, there is a way to do it correctly, and you will maybe add your sprinkling of individuality, but you kind of got to follow the military way. And yet, it seems to me that despite all that, that the military's done a pretty good job of changing and evolving and keeping up to date.
mm.
What do you think? What do you think the corporate world can learn from the military world in terms of embracing change and keeping up to date and remaining competitive?
It's a great discussion topic, and I think we could have done the entire session just on this alone. Um, I think you can come at this from a number of different angles, Edward, and I'll come at one just from a really basic, what I call tactical picture, to paint a picture. Um, the military in the sort of warfighting context has hardwired into its DNA agility and flexibility.
Hmm.
And that's because no two missions are the same, and therefore the things that you need to achieve a mission with vary constantly. And so if you take, for example, the metaphor of a group of soldiers or marines or whatever going from A to B across a piece of battle space, at some point they'll need artillery. At another point they'll need transport to get across, and then they might need to get across a river, so they'll need some of that. And then so they are constantly like a sort of morphing virus and or bacteria. They are constantly having people they've never worked with before, or have they, bolted onto them, and other people pushed off to go and help somebody else all the time.
Right.
And so the so what from that and hence I brought that point up about whether they know them or not. It obviously helps if you do know them. But one thing's for sure is if everybody's got the same, if you like, willingness to be agile and flexible, then it almost doesn't matter what the mission is or who's working with you, because everybody's got the same approach, the same, can do, I've never worked with this particular mob of guys, but I know roughly how they do stuff, and so we'll work with them in a certain way. And it's this. So the thing about change is the people who struggle with it are the people who haven't got an agile mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all in there. If they are willing to give something a punt, to be innovative, to try something they haven't tried before, to take that bit of advice from somebody miles away who they've never really met before, but they apparently are an expert on it. If you trust them and you give them that trust, then you can be agile and you can adapt and move on. But
Yeah.
it's if you don't have that mindset, if you're not willing to embrace that different way of doing something, you will find change very difficult for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine that there are moments in a military situation where one select section of people does push back on somebody else who is trying to kind of suggest something else, and but it's no different in the corporate situation. Um,
No,
and
very much the same.
yeah,
Very much the same. The challenges, and again, indeed, many of the challenges are the same. There's a lot of what I call corporateness in the military, whether
right,
it's annual report, appraisal reporting processes, or you know. Cleaning the place up, or building a new accommodation block for the lads, or whatever it happens to be. Things that happen that are frankly exactly the same issues across the board. We just do it in camouflaged pajamas, but the actual issues are fundamentally identical.
yeah. And I think many big corporations they use a certain system for many years, and perhaps their system of doing reviews and annual feedback or something, and then somebody comes along and becomes a new position and they say, oh, I want to change all this, and people are, oh no, I've just got used to it. Well, we've been doing it 15 years. And I think that probably the military, I mean, there must be a genuine desire to bring people into the military environment to bring about change in internal processes, just as there is in a corporation.
Definitely, both in and out of uniform, Edward. There is, there are, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Of
Yeah.
course, there are things that just frankly should be left alone.
Mm.
But I think, whether you're doing it in the military because you're looking at a different way of achieving a mission, or in the corporate sector, you're looking for a different way to get business, commercial advantage. You still, whether you have to, send in a recce report or write a business case. The issue is the same. The issue is about making a reasoned justification. And why does that have any effect on leadership? Well, because actually, if there is a change thing happening, this is about bringing people along with you, and this is where the leadership style, the flavour, the time where it says no, enough's enough, we've just got to do this, bang, rather than come on everybody, jolly hockey sticks, let's go and do this, it'll be fun.
Right.
There are it's all about how that is communicated, and how the team is brought forward together.
Yeah. Very good. Well, my book, as you know, just picking it off the shelf, is called Where's My Free Lunch? And what do you think about that as an idea, as a sort of final thought? What do you think when you hear the idea there's no such thing as a free lunch? What comes to your mind? And do you tend to agree with that in terms of your experience?
I, I don't think there is such a thing as a free lunch. I think everything is earned,
Hmm.
and it's usually earned the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. That is obviously the reason that I chose that title. But my experience has been over the years that anything worthwhile, you've got to work for it. And you've
Absolutely.
got to put effort into it, and you've got to think about it, and you're going to give up something, and you might give up money, you might give up time, you might give any amount of different possible things in order to achieve something. But this sort of idea that it'll just happen, and I certainly think that there are some people who are very charismatic and who have a little bit of a gift for being the leading other people. But I think those people sometimes don't work as hard on being good leaders as the people who have to struggle and have to think.
Yeah, yeah,
I always give the example as well that like with because I'm very interested in presentation skills and speaking and public speaking, and I've worked with quite a lot of people on that, and that there's this idea that extroverted people, very comfortable standing up and talking, are good speakers, and that introverted, more shy people, yeah, they're not going to be very good at that. And yet, my experience is the very best speakers are the ones who start out from the introverted, little bit shy, not really wanting to do it, and because they work harder at it, and they
mm,
tend to be more authentic, and they
yes,
treat their audience with a lot of respect because they think, imagine it was me in the audience, I'm going to do this better.
yeah.
So
I
I
think there's a
I
lot of
believe you've got
truth
to
to that.
work hard if you want anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, and I think you like that person who works hard and delivers a great presentation, the leader that works really hard at their being agile and using different skills at different times, different approaches in different situations. That is a leader who is effective.
Mm.
Whereas we've all come across hugely charismatic, very persuasive people, and do you trust them as much? If they are leading you on Operation Certain Death, or whether or not they're saying come on, we're going to go and bid for this tender. Are you going to trust them not to muck it up by being that you know, gesticulative, big hands, little maps, extrovert, when actually, what the audience there might need is somebody who's more deliberate, more precise, more Montgomery-esque, as opposed to a
My
Robert-esque
my
type.
my little easy to remember kind of three letters for the fundamentals of good leadership is I call it my API, which is sort of in the tech world that means something, and it's just I can remember it. But
Yeah.
that's awareness and so that's awareness of the situation, awareness of yourself, awareness of what you have, awareness of the strengths and weaknesses of your own team, awareness of what's going on in your marketplace. That thing,
Mm,
awareness for leaders is very, very important. And then P stands for purpose, which is you're like the champion of the purpose. So the why is you're there to if people have doubts about the why, you're there to be that person to help them on the way to understanding it and provide that purpose, and that mission statement, and then the I is inspiration. So I think if you've just been talking about it, they're providing that inspiration to people.
mm,
You are once again the champion of let's all do this, we can do this, and you might inspire people by being very hardworking, you might inspire people by being very brilliant, you might inspire people by just being a great listener. There are
mm.
different ways that you can inspire.
Absolutely. No, a key attribute. No question about it, and it is achieved in different ways. And the in my little world as a former Royal Marine, we have a thing called the commando mindset,
Hmm.
which is be the first to understand, be the first to adapt and respond, and be the first to overcome. Now, that's not a gung ho statement. When you sit down and pour acid over that and analyze it, it's deeply well thought through. It speaks to some of these absolutely fundamental attributes that we're describing, and if you are not an inspirational person in one way or another, you won't get the job done, like you say.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great place to end. I'm pretty sure that the title of this podcast, if it's okay with you, is going to be The Commando Mindset. That was a great way
Fantastic.
to end it. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you, Andrew. Thank you so much for giving up your lunch break to talk to me. And I look forward to inviting you back on again at some point for a further discussion. But that was brilliant. Thank you.
Edward, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. See you soon, Andrew.
I look forward to it.